everything stopped and a voice from heaven said, "How is it that you who have denied me your entire life, all of a sudden are calling upon me to help you out in the middle of difficulty?" And the atheist said, "Well, I guess it is a bit hypocritical for me to do that. But let me ask you this then. Would you make that bear a Christian?" So instead of the bear with his claws ready to seize the man, the bear put his claws on his chin and said, "I thank you, God, for the food we're about to receive." Well, be all these statements that they make, I think that an atheist would find delight in the Book of Esther, because the Book of Esther, the only writing of all the 66 writings that we have in our Bible, it's the only writing, the only book that does not mention God. It mentions the name of the king 39 times. He's called Xerxes, or as the Jews called him, Ahasuerus, 39 times, but not one mention of God in the entire book. It's no wonder that when the rabbis in the year 90 AD were deciding upon which Jewish writings would go into their sacred scriptures, the Book of Esther was one of the last ones to go in, one of the last ones chosen. Two of the others that were almost excluded from the Old Testament were the Song of Solomon, because it was thought that there was too much sex in that writing to go into the Old Testament. And the other writing that had difficulty was the book of Ecclesiastes, because the person who wrote that seemed to have a lot of questions that he never seemed to have gotten answers for. And so Esther and the Song of Solomon and the Song of Songs and whatever the book was I just said, did not go, or had difficulty getting into the Old Testament. I wonder why the writer of the book of Esther didn't mention God. It may be, I think, because people have different ways of expressing their understanding of God. There are some people, and I know I'm not one of them, and I'm not saying that they are on the wrong track and I'm on the right by any means, but I have a number of friends, relatives, friends, acquaintances, who are always talking about what God is doing in their lives. God did this, God did that, God answered this prayer, God is leading me here, God is leading me there. There are a lot of people who find it very easy to talk about God like that. There are other people who are reluctant to talk about how God is doing this or doing that. They are just as dedicated to God, they love God just as much, but they may not be as sure as some of the other folks about how God works. Or, if they are sure, they just would rather not talk about it so openly. My guess is that the writer of the book of Esther was in that second category. There's no question when you read the book, and you can read it very quickly because it has only 10 chapters, and you can sit down in 20 or 30 minutes, you can read the entire book. It leaves no doubt that the writer believes that there is an invisible hand working in the affairs of humans to bring about good ends or divine ends. But he never mentions that it is God who is doing these things. Let's take a look at the story and see what you think. The story opens when the king or the emperor of a vast ancient empire, Empire of Persia. Now, Persia is today's Iran, a country that is so much in the news that our government, together with other Western governments, is doing its very best to try to keep them from developing nuclear weapons. So today's Iran is yesterday's, or our stories this morning, ancient Persia. And as I said, the king of Persia was named either Xerxes, that's a hard name to pronounce, Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. Xerxes shows up in the ancient Greek historian Herodotus' writings when he led Persians in an attack against the Greeks in the ancient world. But in our story, the story opens with the king of Persia having a month-long banquet in which he celebrates the triumphs of his conquests. And at the end of that month-long banquet, he has a week-long banquet in which he invites everybody, and he says, all the food you can eat and all the beer you can drink. Just try to imagine what the seventh day of that week-long orgy must have been like in ancient Persia. All the people in the country eating all the food they want and drinking all the beer they can hold, and maybe some drinking more than they can hold. In the midst of all of this, he sends word for his beautiful queen, whose name is Vashti, V-A-S-H-T-I. He invites his queen, he sends word for his queen to come and present herself before this great throng of drunken, sotted people. She says, not on your life. I'm not coming. The king is enraged, and he consults with his advisors and says to them, what am I to do with this woman? And they said, depose her and select a new queen. All right, let's put another player now on the stage. This time is a man named Mordecai, who is a Jew. The Jews had been conquered by the Babylonians, and Babylonians had taken them off into captivity, and some of them had gone back to their homeland in Palestine and Jerusalem, and others had stayed in the eastern part of the empire where King Xerxes now reigned. And one of those was a man named Mordecai, who had distinguished himself in the kingdom of Persia and held high administrative office. And Mordecai was also the cousin of a woman in, actually this woman, what I'll say, it was a cousin. He had raised this girl when her parents had died when she was young. And so she'd grown up. The story describes her as a woman admirable in both face and form. And Mordecai sends word to Esther. He says, don't tell anybody you're a Jew, but he says, I want you to be one of the people in the contest for the king's new queen. And so many, many women in Persia were brought before the king, but because his eye settled on Esther, he decided that she would be the one to replace Vashti, who had refused to appear when he had summoned her. And so Esther became the new queen. Enter a third character in the story, a man named Haman. Haman happened to be, if you went back in history, a member of an old enemy of the Jews, the Amalekites, and those people had wandered around just as the Jews had been pilgrims in various places. And Prince Haman had also risen in power in the Persian government. And as Prince Haman came before the king, he came out of the king's palace, And he noticed that of all the people who didn't bow down to him, Mordecai the Jew refused to bow down to him. He was enraged. How is it, he says, that this man does not bow down and pay respect to me? I'm the superior. And so he goes home and talks to his family about it, and his family says, you need to get rid of that man, because I think he's going to be trouble. Something had happened not too long before. Mordecai had overheard two guards to the king's palace talking about how they were planning to assassinate King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus. Mordecai told Esther, who was now the new queen, to tell King Ahasuerus about this plot. He did. The two men were arrested. They were found guilty of conspiracy, and they were hanged, and the whole thing was written down in the record books of the Medes and the Persians. Haman comes back with his plan. His plan is to kill Mordecai, and more than that, he had determined that Mordecai, as a Jew, was a representative of all the Jews, and he wanted to wipe out the whole Jewish population in Persia. Mordecai, hearing of this plot, calls upon Esther to notify the king again of an attempt, this time not against the king's life, but against Mordecai's and the Jewish people's life. She said to Mordecai, I can only make appearances before the king at certain times, and I've already made my appearance, and the penalty for appearing before the king without his summons is death. Mordecai says, well, but who knows but what you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? You must go. And so there was one exception that could be made for a person appearing before the king when the king had not summoned them. And that is, if they appeared before the king and the king raised his scepter, then that person could be admitted without penalty. And so Esther said to Mordecai, I will go, and if I die, I die. And so she goes, appears in the outer room, the king on his throne, and she walks into the room. And the king looks startled, but then he reaches to his side and picks up the scepter and admits the queen, Queen Esther. What is it you want? He asks her. And she says, I've come to ask a favor. The king says, what is it? Anything. Half my kingdom. Whatever you ask. She says, all I ask is that tomorrow night you come to a banquet that I will sponsor and bring with you Prince Haman. So the next evening, there is a banquet. And there's Esther, and there's Haman, and there's the king. They have a nice banquet, and then the king says to Esther, what is it now that I can do for you? And what does she ask? Very strange. She says, I would like for you and Prince Haman to come to another banquet tomorrow night. So the king says, it shall be. So tomorrow night, the three of them gather together. Haman has told his family and all his friends that there must be something really big that the king is planning to do to honor me. And the queen must love me because she's invited me to 2 banquets in a row. So he says, but that Mordecai, he sticks in my craw. I've got to get rid of it. And they said, well, let's build a gallows 75 feet tall and 75 feet tall, and you ask the king if we cannot not only put Mordecai to death, but exterminate all the Jews in Persia. So the gallows is built, 75 feet tall, and so the night before the banquet, the king is having trouble sleeping. Early morning, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., king says to his advisors, I need something to read. I can't get to sleep. And so they bring him the records of the kingdom. And he reads through the records. And among other things he reads is that the record said that Mordecai the Jew had notified him of the conspiracy against his life by the two guards. And he says to his advisors, his administrative aides, has Mordecai been rewarded for this deed? And they said, we have no record that he has been. And the king says, well, he shall be rewarded. He said, I need some advice. Are there any of my people out there who can come in and talk to me about plans to celebrate Mordecai? And about that time, Prince Haman is showing up in the hall to ask King Ahasuerus for the right to exterminate all the Jews in Persia. And some of his guards say, Haman is out in the hall. He can give you some advice. And so he invites Haman to come in, and the king says to Prince Haman, what should be done for someone that I wish to honor? Prince Haman says, who is he talking about? He says to himself, he's surely talking about me. There's no one in all of Persia that the king would want to honor more than he would want to honor me. And so Haman says to the king, he says, what you should do is put your royal robes on him. Put the royal jewels on him. Let him ride the royal horse, and let people go before him and say to all the people in the streets, this is the man whom the king delights to honor. And the king says to Prince Haman, I would like for you to do that for Mordecai. There used to be an old TV show, some of you old people here might remember, called The Life of Riley. And one of the things we always look forward to when we looked at the life of Riley was that part of the show where Riley would say, after things had really gone bad, gone sour, Riley would say, what a revolting development this is. Well, Haman said, what a revolting development this is. But it was going to get more revolting for him. Because not only did the next day, before the banquet that was to come in the evening, not only did Haman go down the street leading the horse with Mordecai astride the horse and shouting out to all the people, this is the man whom the king delights to honor. But that evening, when the banquet came, the king turned to Esther again and said, all right, this is the second banquet you've asked for. Now, what is it you want? Surely it wasn't just to have a dinner with me and Prince Haman. She says, no. She said, I'm here because I have learned that there is a great conspiracy against my people. There is a conspiracy to destroy, exterminate every Jew in the kingdom. And I ask you to help us. And the king said, who? Who in the world in my kingdom is out to destroy all the Jews in my kingdom? And she steps back, gets up from her place at the table, steps back, and points her finger at Prince Haman and says, it is that man. King is furious. He demands that he be taken out and hanged on the 75-foot gallows that he had prepared for the hanging of Mordecai the prince. The whole attempt to destroy the Jews is foiled. The Jews want to remember their victory over Haman and the attempts to exterminate them, and they celebrated by having a feast by the Jewish name of when Haman was to try to decide what day it was they were to hang Mordecai on that 75-foot gallows. He and his buddies cast lots in order to determine what the day was. The Jewish word for lots is Purim, P-U-R-I-M. And every March, every year, the month of Adar in the Jewish calendar, the Jews celebrate their deliverance from the destruction that had been planned for them by an ancient Hitler named Prince Haman, and they call that the Feast of Purim. If you have Jewish friends, every March they will observe that feast with great celebration and great happiness. Now, what does it say about a book that does not mention the name of God? It says that you don't have to name God in order to see that invisible hand that moves in the lives of people to bring about the results that God wishes to see take place in our world. As you well know, it is not always what we see or what we want, but as Christians, we believe that this God is the God who does good things for us. That is the message that we have in this ancient book, the book of Esther.